All right, let's jump right into this. So the very first step of building a deck on your house or on anybody else's house is getting permission from your local municipality. This step made me feel very nervous at first that I didn't know what I was doing, and it took a lot to perfect this step, and I want to make this as easy and simple as possible on you. So you need a building permit, recognized permission, you as the contractor to be building a structure that people are going to be standing on outside and onto this house. Sometimes you don't need a permit to build a deck. A lot of times, if you're building a floating deck that is ground level and not attached to the house, a lot of municipalities and cities won't require it. But 9 times out of 10, you will need a building permit to build a deck in any condition. You receive the building permit from your building department that operates likely out of your city hall building in whatever city you're at, specifically in America. Outside of America, you might have to do a little bit of your own research, but I assure you it's very similar. There are generally 3 specific documents you need to get your building permit. The first one, you obviously need a building permit application form specific to your municipality that they will provide. You can usually find those online or at City Hall. You will also need drawings of the design of the structure that you are building. So they need construction drawings showing all of the components of your deck. So before you even begin and get permission, you need to know exactly what you are getting yourself into and present it to the city, and they will give you permission. This sounds a lot harder than it is. There are 3 ways that you can acquire drawings for your deck. One, obviously you can try to do it yourself. If you're taking this course, I assume you have never built a deck before and you don't really know what's going on. I assure you, if you do this course, you'll have a clear understanding to maybe by hand draw your own drawings that are detailed enough to submit them to City Hall. But if you're not good putting pen to paper, I would maybe try the other 2 ways to acquire drawings for your deck. Another way is to obviously hire a structural engineer, an architect, or simply a contractor who has experience drafting up drawings for decks. Decks are simple structures that most of the time do not require an architectural stamp. Normal everyday contractors can acquire these because they are pretty simple outdoor structures. So if you hire an architect, a structural engineer, might cost you a couple $100s, but you'll be able to customize any deck that you can think of onto your house specifically. So I would maybe recommend that route. It might cost you a little bit more money up front and a little bit more work that you're looking to get into, but especially if you're trying to get into this as a profession for other people, this is a great step to get very comfortable with. Another option to acquire drawings is to buy prefab drawings that are already designed that are available online. I've seen a lot of drawings that are just PDFs that you pay for $15 to $45 online. You just pay for them, download them. You might have to customize them a little bit. The plan examiner and the city hall might have to customize them a little bit, but generally they are detailed enough for you to just say this is what I'm building and they approve it. We will have some exterior experience designs available for you within this course that I have designed personally, and a lot of these we have even built and got approved by City Hall and here in St. Louis, Missouri already, so they should be good for wherever you live. So to recap, there are 3 ways to acquire the drawings that you need, and the drawings of the design are one of 3 things that you will need to get your building permit. You can get drawings by doing them yourself, hiring a professional, or buying already designed drawings online as digital products. As well as the permit submission application form, the deck drawings that you have, You will also need a site map. And a site map shows exactly how big the structure is on your property and where it is within your property lines. The very best form of a site map to use is a property survey that you may have gotten when you bought your house. Not everyone gets surveys when they buy their house, but a lot of people do. So if you have a survey, you can just print out a copy of your survey and then highlight the deck that you're either replacing or rebuilding on the survey with the dimensions of it and how far they are from all of your property lines. If you don't have a survey, what I've done quite a bit before is I've gone to Google Earth, look up the property that I will be working on, take a screenshot, turn it into a PDF, edit the PDF to show where the deck is on the property lines, and show how far away the deck is from the property lines, and put that within my drawing presentation that I give to the city. So to recap, your site map, you can draw it yourself on graph paper and a ruler, measure the property on all sides, measure the house, measure where you're going to put the deck, and how far the deck is from all of the property lines. You can draw it on yourself with graph paper and a pen and a highlighter. That's how I started. Now I try to use the survey route or the Google Earth route. They have all worked for me in the past. It's whatever is easiest and the most comfortable for you. I highly recommend doing the survey route. If you don't have a survey, they are great to have for future exterior projects. So after you submit your application form with your deck design drawings, with your site map, they will either review it on the site in front of you, or they will likely take it for maybe a week to two, review it. They might send you back with some revisions. They might create the revisions themselves, and probably you will have to pay a fee to get your permit. Permit fees I've paid anywhere between $50 to $500. Most of the time it really depends on the project cost that you put on the application form. After you pay and your permit is issued, you are ready to go. Along with the permit, you want to post it in the front window of the house during the project. And then after you remove the old deck and dig your new holes, you'll have to call City Hall for a pier inspection, where they will come and measure your holes. Here in Missouri, they usually have to be 30 inches deep. If the posts that we're installing on top of the piers are more than 8 feet tall, they have to be 36 inches deep. That's how it is here in Missouri. It's very different depending on the frost line of where you're at, of where you're building, and your municipality's building code, but 30 to 36 inches is a really good depth to go by. After the city approves your pier holes, you're cool to dig the concrete. If your deck is short and the frame cannot be seen underneath after the deck is complete, you will need to call the city back under the permit number for a frame inspection before you put the railing and the deck boards on. But if the deck is high enough that the inspector can see the deck components under the deck after it's constructed, you usually just need a pier inspection, and then the frame inspection can happen during the final inspection. Getting permission to build a deck from your city ensures everybody stays safe during the building project and for the deck's life after the project is done. People will be using this deck, standing on it, spending time on it, having good memories on this deck for years to come, and you don't want anything to ever happen to it. So getting approval from as many people as possible who have experience in building decks is very, very important during this process. When I started my career as a deck builder, I worked with a couple of stubborn homeowners that did not want to involve the local government with their building project. The building department found out, and they had to remove the deck completely and start over. Otherwise, the city was going to put a lien on their house. These are real things that I experienced. So trying to be ignorant and fast forward through this step will only come back to bite you in the butt. So yes, take this seriously, and please reach out to me, Noah, at Exterior Experience LLC, if you have any further questions about the building permits the site maps, or the deck designs. Feel free to even reach out to me personally if you want me to design a deck for you to build. We can communicate through email. I'll design it, send you some proofs, and then you can submit it and build it wherever you're at and help you along the way. So good luck on this, and please let me know if you have any issues, but I know you got this.
Okay, cool. So this is going to be our deck project that we teach you how to do this. I think this is the perfect situation because the current deck is in such bad shape. I think a very ordinary size for a residential home, especially in the city. It's just a small little platform with some stairs, nothing too crazy. So I'm just assuming most people are in the same situation where they just need something very similar to this. And so when you walk around, whether you're deciding whether you need a new deck, I mean, it's pretty obvious in most situations. Like in this one, you could physically see the deck on a slope. It's visually falling over, right? So, I mean, that's just an easy tell from there. And then as you walk up, you know, this post is all rotted through. I'm walking up the stairs and they flex, they're rotted, they're weak. I could just pull up the boards. I see so much rot and damage that it's just so obvious it's not safe, you know. Actually here, you know, I could probably kick this over with not too much effort. Here on the very edge of the deck boards where they're tied into the side, that is just completely gone. Most of the boards are actually doing that same exact thing. You can see where the deck is attached to the house, and it's quite literally coming off of the house right here. It's slipping out. It's coming away. You can see the bolts pulling it off the house. It's literally collapsing. You look underneath here. So the support is so rotted that the bolts came off here. This deck is not being supported by much, kind of almost mostly by the stairs, to be honest with you. And so it's really not safe. What I'm going to show you how to do first, if you have something like this that's connected to your house, we need to safely dispose of it before we could even start building our brand new structure. So we're going to start ripping this thing apart. I mainly only use two tools to demo something like this, both of which we talked about in previous videos. One would be the Sawzall right here, just literally to cut this thing down. And then the other one is the rock bar, just to pry the old wood off. When you're buying blades for your Sawzall, for this specific situation, what you want to get is the nail embedded wood blades, because that will cut your wood, it'll cut the nails and the screws that's holding everything together, and it'll just go straight through them. And, you know, most of the time, you just change the blade from the Sawzall by twisting the nose here and then popping the blade out. But you always want to make sure that your saw is unplugged whenever you are changing the blade. So with the Sawzall, you know, if you have to go buy one, that's fine. The corded ones are more powerful and they're cheaper. And then, you know, they have ones that take battery, but then you got to kind of pick a brand and be specific about it. But to plug it in safely to your extension cord, you tie one around the other like that, and then plug them in. And then that way, whether you're walking, it will never get unplugged. It's kind of ties the two cords together. And the Sawzall was, when I first started doing this, the Sawzall used to scare me. And it was very intimidating being so close to the blade. I wasn't used to that with a miter saw or a circular saw. But just grip it like this and just be strong and pay attention. I don't usually wear gloves or a hard hat. The main thing I always have on are safety glasses. I've had a piece of wood come up into my eye before, and I went to the emergency room, and it was a very close call, and it's just not worth it. Your eyes are very important. If you don't protect anything else, at least protect your eyes. So once you have your saw plugged in, you've got your tied knot, you're ready to go. You're destroying your deck. Pretty much want to work backwards. So when you're building it, the last thing you install is the railing. When you're destroying it, the first thing you destroy is the railing, and then the deck boards, and then the frame, and then your supports. You pretty much just work backwards the way that you are going to install everything. And so here I'm just going to take my Sawzall and just start taking out the bits of the railing section by section, and then the posts, and then the deck boards. It goes by really quick when there's something like this in such bad shape. Now that you've got the railing down, you want to bring up your deck boards. I have found the easiest way to do this is to grab your rock bar that you'll need for digging your holes, or you could get some other kind of pry bar or something like that. You know, a lot of the decks that you might destroy, your deck that you might destroy, the deck boards might have screws going through them, and so you could just unscrew it. But in this situation, it's all connected by nails, so we have to pry everything off. And I found this tool to be the most useful tool to do this process with. So pretty much, you just pry one board off one by one, just like this. And just like that, you just take one off and you go down the line, but you have to be very careful because as you take the boards off, the frame becomes weaker and weaker. So we might only be able to get halfway through these deck boards before we have to get on the ground because the frame will no longer be able to support us. So now you have the deck boards off. You just got to take the joists out now. And depending on the deck, kind of depends on how I go about this, but in this particular situation, I think I'm literally just going to take my Sawzall back out and cut it at both ends and take out the middle. And then once I do that for all the joists, the rest should pretty much just be able to be taken out. And here we go. So we've got the deck down. As you saw, as we were destroying it, we were just throwing it in the giant pile right in the backyard. And so there's a couple ways that you could dispose of the remainder wood that you tore out. And so what we mainly do is we order what you call a roll-off dumpster. In your town or your city, just Google roll-off dumpster or roll-off waste, and I'm sure there's a waste company dropping off roll-off dumpsters around your area. And so what we get is a 40 cubic yard dumpster, which is the biggest that they offer. We get such a big dumpster because we have multiple decks and things that we're working on at the same time. We have different crews. But for you, if you're destroying a deck this size, you could probably get away with, honestly, a 20-yard dumpster. And our 40-yard dumpster costs $400 to have for a week. I think the 20-yard dumpster is probably $250, $300, something like that. And if that's kind of out of your price range, if you live in the city and you're trying to be more frugal with this project, I mean, you could literally cut it up into really small pieces and throw it in your alley dumpster if you're in the city that has waste in the alley. Or if you're in the county, you could call bulk pickup every so often. They'll come and get more than just like your wheelie bin or whatever it is. And so also, I'm sure in your area there is a dump site. So if you don't have a pickup truck, you can maybe rent one from Home Depot or Menards for like $75, and then just load it all in the back of the pickup truck, and you could probably go dump it for free or a small fee depending on the weight. And those are your easiest options that you have available to you, more than likely, in your area to get rid of all of this stuff that you don't want anymore. 3 simple ways to dispose of your old deck. You could get a roll-off dumpster, salvage it, and burn it. A lot of people do that. Another option is to cut it up in small pieces. If you live in the city, you could just week by week throw a little bit into your dumpster. Or you could call your trash company and do like a bulk pickup. Or, there's companies out there, junk removal companies, that will come and load it up and take it to the dump site for you. Load it up in a rented pickup truck from Home Depot, Menards, or Lowe's, and then take it to the dump site yourself. Those are your main options, I would say, that you would want to look into. The most convenient but the most expensive would be the roll-off dumpster. The cheapest is probably going to the dump. I feel like now that we have the old deck out of the way, now where we want to start is building up the support for the new deck. And what that entails is supporting it from the ground up. And as far as the ground support goes, that means we have to dig into the ground, pour new concrete below the frost line for the wooden post to sit on. And that is all the support that you'll need to hold up this entire structure. And so there's pretty much 2 different ways to support a deck. You could have your supports being at the very end and your corners, and it's just like one complete structure. But the way we're going to do this one, we're having it towards the end, but it's going to be resting on top of the support. And we like doing it this way because it's easier to square up. You can have your support, you could build your box, and then square it once your support's there. If you want your support being in the back, you have to have your box squared up before you even dig your holes. So this is our preferred method because it's easier and it's quicker. And if you're doing this for yourself the first time, I'm sure you want the easy, quick approach, just like we do when we're doing this all day, every day. So anyway, these are our post hole diggers. This is what we're going to use to just dig our 2 piers. The piers are the concrete pillars that support the wooden posts. And so our deck is 10 feet long coming off the house, and you could have up to 2 feet hanging off your posts, hanging off your support beam. And so I just measure from the house. Our deck is going to be 8 feet long, so I'm going to dig 10 feet off the house. And that is pretty much right behind the old piers. We don't want to use the old piers because we don't know how deep they are. We need our building inspector to come out and verify that our holes in our concrete is deep and thick enough that it's going to be able to support our structure. And so we support our structure with 6x6 posts. And what that means for our concrete piers is we need to double the size of the piers. We need to double the size of the posts to pour the piers. So if we're pouring 6 inches of posts, we need 12 inches of support around it. So we're going to dig a hole that's 12 inches wide and then 30 inches deep because that is our frost line here in Missouri. And I will say, out of the whole process of building a brand new deck, destroying the old one, digging the holes, and pouring the concrete are the 3 hardest steps. So once you have your concrete poured, everything else is a lot easier. This is where all the labor intensive things come in right here. And it just gets easier from here, I promise. A few things to think about while you are digging into your ground. You might want to call Dig Right. Here in Missouri, the number is 811. It might vary throughout the nation. I'm not too sure. But there is a company out there that come out for free and surveys your land to see if there's any utilities running underground where you are going to be digging. We don't call them in the city because we know everything's in front of the house, typically. Like everything's ran from the street. The only thing that we have in the back is your sewer lateral, but that is much deeper than just 30 inches. So we usually don't call people to survey our land if we're in the city, but once we go out into the county and all your power is run underground, that's when we start calling them. But here in the city, everything's above ground or in the front, so we don't really need to worry about too much. Yep. Okay. So, as I said, maybe 12 inches. You can see inside the hole. We have 12 inches going this way, and 12 inches at least going this way. It's closer to like 13. And then down deep to the surface needs to be 30. We're closer to about 33, going all the way around. So wherever you stick the hole, it's got to be at least 30 inches. Sometimes we're at 34, 32, at least 30 here in Missouri. But check your building codes because it's different depending on where you are in the country. Now that you've got your hole dug, congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment. It's not easy digging a hole 30 inches, maybe more depending on where you are. So this is one of those things that when I was learning how to do this, I couldn't find exactly the right way to do it on YouTube. And this is why I think this course is so valuable, because I've had to redo this a couple times because city inspectors didn't like the way I originally did it. I'm going to show you how to pour your concrete piers for your support on your deck the right way. Most efficient, cost-effective way possible. Be pouring concrete. There's a lot of different types of concrete when you go to Lowe's or Home Depot, when you're walking through the aisles. Two things that I would suggest, 2 different types I would suggest buying, is just the typical high-strength concrete mix. It looks exactly like this. Or the Quikrete 5000, which is 5,000 psi, which it could handle more pressure. It's technically stronger concrete, the Quikrete 5000 is, but it's also more expensive. So you can save yourself a couple bucks by buying this, and this will just do the job. So this is what we use most of the time, just because it works just as good, honestly. And so, you could buy these guys in 80-pound bags for about $4. The Quikrete comes in 50 pound bags, and it's about $7, closer to $8. So if you're buying this in bulk like we usually do, there's a massive difference. But I mean, if you just want to do the best you can, and $8 to $4 isn't that big of a difference to you, then go for the Quikrete 5000. But definitely don't get the red bags. Don't get the quick set, because you don't want this to set up quicker than 24 hours, because that stuff sets up in like 20 minutes, and that's no bueno. We own a concrete mixer. I'm sure you don't. You could rent one of these things from Home Depot for 4 hours, which is plenty enough time, for about 25 bucks. And I suggest you do that. Save your back the work of straining it so much to mix it by hand. Please, it's just $25. Throw it in your car, whatever you got. It's really worth the trouble. So, we had to once you dig the holes, once you dig your holes for your piers, you have to get them inspected by the city. And so when our inspector came over to look at ours, he mentioned that the plan said that they had to be 18 inches in diameter, and then we could build them up to the 12 inches. So that's what we did. We just dug a bigger hole. You probably won't have to do that for your hole. Just kind of depends on like where you're at in the country, I suppose. So we're just gonna hop right into it. So for the hole, at the base of every concrete pad or pier or anything, you want to pour some gravel down, which we have bags of gravel, but we had some old concrete piers that we jackhammered up, and we're using that as our gravel base for drainage and all things like that. So at the bottom, we have some old piers that we jackhammered, we threw at the bottom, and now we're just going to cover the entire thing with some concrete that we're going to mix up right now. Mixing the concrete, what you want to do, you want to start off with some water in there. Just get your garden hose out, get a little wet, get it moving. And I will tell you right now, concrete work is super messy. So like, this is where you get out your worst clothes that you want to ruin, because it just gets all over the place. Probably take your watch off, take your phone out of your pocket. It makes a huge, huge dusty mess. We had a couple casualties today. It was raining this morning while I was loading up all this concrete, and a couple of bags got soaking wet and just started ripping in my truck bed on the job site. It was not pretty. So I'm doing this for a client. This is how I make my living. If you could just hold off until the rain is done, and if timing's not a big issue for you, definitely do that, because it's an awful nightmare every single time. I usually mix about two bags per mixer. I want it to pretty much look like mud with rocks in it. You know, it's like not like soup. It's not like, you know, you want to be able to smush it up and it's kind of watery, but it's still kind of thick. It's really hard to describe, but either way, like if you have too much water in there, it all dries out. It just takes a little bit more time. If there's not enough water in there, then it might not cure properly. So it's better for you to make it more wet than not wet enough, if that makes sense. Now I set this up before I filled it up with my water and my crete. I set it in the position that it would fall into the hole pretty easily. So let's see if that works out. Perfect. So as you can see, that did a lot of the job. We'll probably need about 3 more of those. So we're just gonna be mixing concrete and dumping it in the hole. And before we start messing with this sono tube to bring it to the width and the height that we want, you're gonna get both of your holes to ground level again with all concrete. So you're just gonna keep dumping into the hole until it's ground level. And then once you have that for both of your holes, maybe your third hole, then you come back around and then we'll show you what to do with this after that. So, as you could maybe see, we have the concrete back up to ground level. And it doesn't look pretty, it's a big mess. And I'm sure you've got one on your hands too, and that's totally fine. Now is when we start kind of cleaning up the mess little by little, starting with the sono tube here. When I first started building things, I couldn't find a YouTube video that correctly explained how to use the sono tube, and I would stick the whole tube in the ground, and that I had to rebuild a couple projects because it started to lean over and there wasn't much support. I'm about to show you the intent of this tube here. So once you have your hole totally filled up, you only need about 8 inches of the tube in the hole, and then about 8 inches roughly, depending on your situation, above it. So what I'm gonna do, I need 8 inches below, 8 inches above, so I need about 16 inches. But just to give myself room to play, I'm gonna cut it at 20 inches right here. Got my mark at 20 inches, and the easiest way to cut this that I have found is with your circular saw. You could use a knife or a handsaw, but I just find this is quick and easy. And the beautiful thing, since this is going into a hole, and if you could use the other side, this cut doesn't have to be perfect and straight and everything like that. So that is why I use a circular saw, because it doesn't have to be perfect. See, no worries. So this is a 12-inch diameter because we are using 6x6s as our support, which is what we always use. If you're using a 4x4, then you would use an 8-inch diameter. So you always need like twice the amount of inches from your support to have on your concrete support. So what we're gonna do here is, all right, now that we've got our mark, we're pretty much gonna go from the top here. Let's make it about 9 inches. So that is how much we'll have. And we'll find the exact measurement once we set our other tube. So there you go. You just stick that right into that giant pile. And this is where your rebar comes in. So how you support this top half of your concrete here, you have a 2-foot thing of rebar that is going to connect the hole and the tube, so they stay strong and supported and connected. And that is the point of all of this. And when I put these things in, I use 4, one on, roughly each side. But I keep the middle open because that is what we typically will be drilling into to put our footing, our metal footing, in for our wood support. And how I found, after we already had the holes dug and filled with concrete, I just double checked everything and took another measurement from the house, did 8 feet, and that was 8 feet was the center of my tube. So in theory, my 6x6 could be in the center of the tube, that's in the center of the hole, and then it will be correctly supported by the deck. And so I'm gonna leave that there for now, and then do it again over there, make sure everything is straight and it lines up with each other. Looks like I'll probably have to move this one back just a smidge, just because you want it to be straight. It's okay if it's a little off, which is why I like this style of supporting your deck, because it doesn't have to be like perfectly in line. It's a little bit more forgiving than having them in your corners. Right here. Yep, that looks about right to me. Come up just a little bit, right? All right. Now just pour slowly. I'll get it with the shovel. Now this part is a lot easier with the partner. You're just trying to fill this one tube up. You don't want any more going in the hole. But so Noah, he's my brother, our cameraman. You know him, Noah. Noah's gonna pour it while I try to guide it into our tube with the shovel here. We'll see how it goes. Slowly, yep. Whew, hope this is dry by tomorrow. It's like straight up water. Mm-hmm. Keep going. Keep going. Come on, dump it. All right. So you want your concrete to dry nice and flat and pretty. And I am not a professional when it comes to finishing concrete, but I know my tricks to help me out with building decks. And so no matter what it looks like, it could look like this, but how you get it to be flat, take your little trowel here and just keep tapping it on all the sides and vibrating the whole structure, and it will all eventually kind of come together. Kind of slap the top, push everything down. Once all the rocks are down and it's a layer of water on top, vibrate the sides a bit more, and it'll pretty much just work itself out. I mean, it's a liquid at this point. And so once you just keep vibrating it, you just kind of smooth it out once it's all about level there. And however you walk away with it is the way it's going to look tomorrow when you come back to it. That worked pretty well, I think. Something that we have to do in St. Louis almost every time we work in the city is tug point behind the old ledger board. Now, you won't have to do this if your house is siding and plywood and studs, but what tug pointing is on a brick home, it is reinforcing the strength of the bricks by replacing the deteriorated mortar that is in the joints. So before we hang our new ledger board, what we have to do, you see how there's a gap in there? My whole finger could almost fit in there. There's loose bricks to the side, if you could see that. We're just reinforcing the strength of everything, because in theory, if our deck lasts about 30 years, this is the only opportunity this wall has to regain some strength. So that is what we will be doing right now. So I'm just gonna clean this off just real quick, get all the old mortar out that I've already scraped out from between the bricks, you know? Take a screwdriver or something to just like dig in there. And then just wash it down just a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect by any means. And then this is just basic mortar mix that you'll find at Home Depot or Lowe's. Just type S mortar, I believe, in the green bag, made by Quikrete. Same brand that makes all the concrete products that we use. Now, this would be the other method if you didn't want to rent a mixer for your concrete piers. You just get one of these black buckets in the concrete section of your Home Depot or Lowe's, and then just mix it up with a shovel like this. It's very time consuming and it's very hard in your body. In this case, you want to add water slowly because you want it to be the right consistency, because it is a huge headache if it ends up being way too wet for you. And you'll know if it's too wet if it won't hold its shape. To me, that looks pretty good. Now, those brick guys, they would probably hate my method of doing this, but I'm not a brick guy, I'm a deck guy. And the way I do it reinforces the wall for me to put my wood on. And that's all I know. I don't know much about working with brick, I will be completely honest with you. Once you have it all mixed up, you get one of these little bags, these little anvil bags from the same aisle that you buy everything else. Like a little pastry bag. And this method is a little tricky just for your first couple goes at it, but hopefully with a couple of tricks of my experience, I can kind of help you out. So you just fill her up. All right. Now it's a two-hand method, right? Your backhand squeezes it out, and your front hand kind of controls it right here. So I'm squeezing at both ends, really. Kind of gets clogged up sometimes where you got to work it out. And if you need to, you can cut a bigger hole, but I've used this one before, obviously, so I think the hole is pretty appropriate. And literally what you do is you load up the front, boop, you're pretty much cocking it, squeezing it in the backhand and controlling it with your front hand. And you're just going all around every little brick that needs it. Anything with a gap, I fill every single gap I see. And yeah, it could be messy. It could be messy when you plug it in, but that's okay because we're going to clean it up afterwards. As long as it gets deep into that crevice, This is going to be the thing that holds this wall together for the next 30 years. Right. Okay. And I can see because we're yeah. Okay. And this is so important to do because this is the exact area we will be attaching the deck, the brand new deck, onto this old house. And so we could do the best job in the world building this deck, but if it's not on the house appropriately or strong enough and the brick starts falling apart behind the deck, then our deck will fail. And then, you know, the homeowner's got a problem, people could get hurt. You know, we're out of money, the homeowner's out of money. You know, it's just a bad situation. So just take just one extra day, slow down your deck process, and reinforce where it's going. And again, if you live in the county, relatively newish house, and it's, you know, vinyl siding and plywood, you won't even have to worry about this. You can just skip this video altogether. But this is for you city folks living in a home that's 100 years old, you know? And I don't know how many people out there watching this live in a home like that, but this is almost every home that we work on here in St. Louis. This is what I do day in and day out, is work on these places. So as you can tell, looks like a bloody mess right now. But it thickens up pretty quick, so you need to give each section a little bit of time. The way I like to tell whether I could start smoothing it out and knocking all the excess off, if I could put my fingerprint in there and my finger stays in there, it takes to the shape. That tells me it's dry enough to be tucking it right back in there. But for instance, I come over here with everything I just laid, you know, it starts running all over the place. That's how I know it's too early to start working with. So, I mean, that's why it's called tuck pointing, you know? You're basically tucking this dried new mortar right back in certain points. So you're just tucking it back in there. Masons use tools for this. I just use my hands. I only do this, you know, maybe 1 or 2 days out of the month of work. Not every home needs it, but, you know, I just find that it's the easiest and most straightforward and the cleanest work when I just do it with my fingers. And then, yes, it dries out my skin really bad, but they make a beautiful product. It's a lotion at Home Depot called Working Hands that makes my hands good as new that same day. There's my joint there. What I'm doing is I'm pinching this and squeezing it and pushing it all the way in there until I can't push it anymore. And then I'm just wiping off the sand. See that? I'm taking the excess off the face of the brick and just tucking it right into that joint. And I'm just doing that everywhere I go. And mortar is nice because, you know, it takes shape really well, like incredibly well. And it can stay like that. It'll harden. But if I just push it to where it wants to go, everything else that isn't in to that joint or that crack or that crevice, it'll just come right off, and I could pretty much just brush it off with my hands without really even making too much of an effort there. See how much better that's looking already? This whole process, when you're just doing it behind a leisure board, I would never do a whole wall or anything like that. But, I'm a deck guy. I'm here to build a deck. If you want to reinforce your wall in your own house, just do it like this. And, I'll probably have about half hour into this whole wall. I'll have to wait overnight to hang my leisure board where the deck is hanging on, but that's no problem. I could wait one day and make my deck last that much longer. It's totally fine by me. Well, here we are. We've got a concrete piers poured. We let them set up for about 48 hours after you saw us pour them. I think 48 hours is a solid amount of time if you could afford to wait that long. 24 hours sometimes does it, but we've ran into some problems where the pier kind of falls apart when we're drilling our hole into it. So at least 2 days, you should be good to go. And so now we're starting to frame the deck. I've got our plans here. So we're going 96 across, 96 inches across, so that's 8 feet. And this is something that you really want to keep in mind because the sides are always visible, and the way I build my decks is I like the joists being on the side of the leisure board. So the leisure board is the piece of wood that's attached to the house. The joists are what come off of the leisure board. You'll be able to visually see what I'm talking about. So our total width of the deck is 96 inches. We'll have 2 boards on the side. So I'm going to take 96 and subtract 3 inches from that because each board on each side is 1.5 inches and 1.5 inches. And the deck boards that we got, they're exactly 8 feet. So I like to have a little bit room to play. So I'm going to even take off another inch off of that. So I have a 1/2 inch to make a straight line once we're cutting the deck boards. So this 96 inches, I'm going to cut this board to be 92 inches. I'm going to cut this leisure board at. The straightest cut with your circular saw, you're going to keep this speed square out and use it as a guide. So you're going to pretty much hold your speed square at this angle right here. Keep your fingers away from the blade. Line the blade up with the line and make sure you're pressing up against the speed square to make your line as straight as possible as you're running down the board, just like this. And you can see right there, that is perfectly straight. Now, attaching this leisure board to a brick house is a lot more complicated than screwing it onto a siding house that has plywood and studs. Alright, while the board is still on the sawhorses, I'm going to pre-drill some holes for our screws to go through. It's just easier to do it like this so we don't have to drill through 2 materials as we're trying to put this thing up. Okay, you got your holes pre-drilled, you got your board cut to length, you got your wall tuck pointed. Now you grab your buddy and stick this thing exactly where you want your deck to be. And it's a lot easier with 2 people. You can do it with 1, but if you got a brother, a neighbor, a wife, girlfriend, something. Alrighty. So when you're putting on your leisure board with your buddy, just use 2 of these Tapcons. You can find them at Lowe's or Home Depot. Most of them comes with a bit. Just drill into your wood, drill into your brick, and put one little screw in on each side. Makes the rest of the process a lot easier if it's just like on there. It's not structurally sound like that, but you're able to work with it on the wall when you're drilling your holes and putting your bolts in, instead of trying to do all that to install it on the wall. It's a lot easier if it's up there already. So just use a couple of these and then everything else is a lot easier. I didn't do it like that for a long time until a building inspector told me, hey, why don't you do it this way? I was like, wow, that makes my life so much easier. And so now we're bolting this thing into the brick. And you need a bolt every 12 inches. So you're gonna start on one side, you're gonna make a mark, right, maybe bring it in an inch or two, just to give room for the washer, and then just run down the line and do every 12 inches. You're just gonna make a line so you know where to put your bolt. And you're gonna do it in an alternating pattern where one bolt is at the top, one bolt is at the bottom. Now, once again, it's all these little steps that will make this process easier and save you a lot of frustration. So now, before I drill my holes into the brick, I'm going to pre-drill my holes into the wood first. So then when I get the hammer drill out, I've already got my hole guided me, and I just gotta go through the brick real quick. And it makes it a lot easier than trying to use the hammer drill to make both holes through the wood. And so our bolts, they've got to be 5/8, and then they got to go 7 inches. They got to be 7 inches long. They're 5/8 thick, 5/8 of an inch. So the bit that I'm using is obviously 5/8 for my hole. And there you go. Now what you want to do, you gotta get out your hammer drill. Now, hammer drill is the most badass tool in the world. The thing is, they're expensive. We got ours brand new, $700 probably. You don't need to go buy a hammer drill just to put your ledger board on. You could go rent one. Like, remember how you rented that concrete mixer? You could rent a hammer drill from Home Depot for 4 hours. You'll only need it for less than an hour probably, and it'll be running about $30. So when you're shopping for your bolts, you want to get 8-inch bolts, wedge bolts, not the expanding bolts, but just the wedge. And you want to secure them into the wall with this anchoring epoxy mix. It's a 2-part epoxy that mixes in the nozzle as you squirt it out of the tube. And that just holds your wedge bolt in there. You want, at least 6.5, 7 inches of the bolt in the wall with the epoxy, and that is going to keep your ledger board up forever. So unfortunately, our camera's microphone died as we were shooting this bit, and so we got to go back and do our best to narrate it over voiceover. So what we're doing right here is we are trying to square our supports for our 6x6 post to the house as well as we can. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're just trying to get a straight line with relatively the same measurement on each pier. So these brackets we're going to anchor into the concrete piers that we poured. And we're going to anchor them to the concrete the same exact way we anchored the ledger board onto the brick house, with pre-drilling a hole with the hammer drill, and then also squirting the anchoring epoxy into the hole, and then putting in our wedge bolts. So it's the same exact process that you just watched in the previous video, and we're just doing it on our brand new concrete piers that we poured a few days ago. And this is exactly why I kept the rebar out of the middle of our piers, because generally we'll be kind of drilling a new hole right into the center of it. Ideally, it might be a little off center depending on how square it is to the house. But for the most part, that's why we keep the rebar out from the middle. If a bolt ever gives you some trouble, you could turn off the rotation of your hammer drill and just have it be a hammer, and then just hit your bolt that way, and it actually works pretty well for bolts during this application. Sweet. So, like everything, as far as the building process goes, there's always more than one way to do it. To do one task, multiple ways to skin a cat, basically. So what you could see us doing here is we are putting a temp side on. Once we are having our bolts installed, we don't fully hammer them down yet. We just screw a board on the side of the ledger board and get it level with our post that is level, standing up completely straight so we can make our mark. And that is just without a doubt the most accurate way that we found. You know, we can measure it and it's always slightly off. We might just have to make the cut a little bigger if we come back around. But this way it's just so accurate, it's worth the time and putting it up temporarily and bringing the post back down. Now, it's important to add that we are doing a sleeper. So if you think about it, the temporary wood that we just put up on its side is resting on the post that we are installing. So you are going to mark the bottom of the temporary board to get the top of the 6x6 support, because it is quite literally going to be sitting on top of it. And that mark represents where how tall the post needs to be. So cut your 6x6 to height. You're going to cut all four sides, and your circular saw still won't reach the middle. So you just cut the middle with your Sawzall. Cut your first post to height, temporarily put up your second post, screw another temporary board connecting the two posts, put a level on the temporary board, and then make the mark. So now what you should have is just your two posts cut for the exact height that you need them to be able to start building your sleeper support for your joist for your new deck. The frame goes up really quick after your support is complete, which is the step that we are working on now. You need to merge two boards together, go through your stack of wood and find two boards that are as close to width as possible. With these pressure treated boards, they can vary so much because they're exactly that. They're dipped in chemicals and they're not going to be perfect. So to merge them, find two pieces that are the same size and then just put one on top of the other. And you are pretty much just putting 3 screws, the top, middle, and bottom, every 12 inches, and that is code to merging the two. Once you have them merged, you are going to be notching out your 6x6. So basically, when you're notching something out, you want to measure what you are going to be inserting into the piece of wood and taking that exact amount of material out. So you just measured the size with this 2x8. It was maybe 7 1/4. So just measure 7 1/4 down and measure the width, whether it's 3 3 3/8. And you really just want to draw out your brand new wood that you merge the two together onto your 6x6 to take that material out that mimics the exact measurements of your board. When you are marking this out on your 6x6, after it is all drawn on there, you're just basically taking your circular saw and just following the lines and cutting out each side. You know, there's not really much more of a simple way to describe it. You just kind of trace your pencil marks with your saw. Use your sawzall, use your circular saw. You'll kind of need to switch between the two, but once you get it pretty well cut out, then you could usually just hit it out with a hammer. Just like that. It's going to make a little L. And so that L, it gives it enough space for your new board that you merge the two together to literally rest on top of. Use these nails to install your posts onto your bracket. The box showed 1.5 inches. It's just a hodgepodge mix. You want really 3.5-inch nails that are galvanized that you just nail into the brackets to connect your wood to your concrete. And it's just 4 nails on each side, 8 nails per post. And it's super satisfying using a hammer to do that. It feels really good. Once your posts are installed, then your new piece of wood that you merged, you are able to lay that on top of your 2 notched 6x6s that are resting on the L. And that is going to be your sleeper support. The last thing you need to do to build this is to fasten your support onto the 6x6s. And what you are going to use is, you could either use lag bolts, or the easier preferred method would be through locks. It's a brand Fasten Master is the brand that makes the specific screws called through locks. You could get them at Lowe's or Home Depot or Menards. So one end of these through locks is just a screw. Use your impact to screw through it all. And then once you're just about through all your material, put the back on. Screw it manually by hand just a little bit to make it just a little tight. And then when you continue to screw the rest of the bolt in, it really clamps it all together. That thing will never move. It's resting on the 6x6 and it is being clamped and screwed all in one mechanism. It is such a strong support, going 30 inches down with concrete into the earth, coming all the way up to that support. Your deck is so strong, it is never going to move. Now, to double check before you keep going, put your temporary board back on your legend board, let it rest on that support you just made, and check the level. One of the most important parts of building your deck is making sure that it is square. What I mean by that is the size from one end to the other does not change. It doesn't change by an inch, it doesn't change by 5 inches. If you have this guy over here, that guy over there, if you're working with 8-foot boards and you have 8 feet on one side and 8 feet and 2 inches on the other side, your board's not going to be long enough. And your whole project is screwed from that point on, you know? And so it's the most important thing. Once you have the support that you need, to make sure that the measurements are all the same. So how do you double check your work? So how you double check that it's all square is you measure one side to the other. You know, we'll start at the house, 96 inches exactly. And then what you do, you come out to the end, 96 inches exactly. And then you do that one corner to the far corner and vice versa. You good?
Yep.
So we're staring at 154 and a quarter. And over here, we're staring at 154 and a quarter. And if something doesn't match, you gotta just keep moving stuff around, you know? So when Noah and I first squared it up, we had 96 down here and 99 down here. So we cut the difference of inch and a half and inch and a half instead of doing like 3 inches on each side. Your two diagonal measurements are the same, and the top of your deck and your bottom of the deck are the exact same. Then you know that you should feel pretty good about your structure being totally square. So it's important to do the two ends, get that square, because when you start filling in the middle, you're gonna find your measurement for each joist from measuring it from this joist at the top and the bottom. So, you're pulling 12 inches on center at the top, and then you're moving this 12 inches on center down below. So it's very important that you have it pretty much squared up before you start filling in the middle. And then once you fill in the middle, then you put on this back, we're gonna snap a string line to where we need it to be so the tree doesn't get in our way. Otherwise, you know, we would just leave it at 10 feet, but we have to bring it in a couple inches. So we'll determine that with the line once all the joists are on, and then we'll slap on our board, and then that will pretty much be the structure of the deck, apart from attaching some hardware to it. So now that you have your two sides, your two side boards square with each other, fill in the middle by installing the rest of the joists temporarily. So like I mentioned before, since our deck is made with composite floorboards, they need to be 12 inches apart. So we start on one end and just put a new board in every foot, basically. And we just pop in a screw at an angle on the top, go into the leisure board, and then temporarily screw it to the sleeper by just screwing it on an angle into the top of the sleeper board. And so everything is temporary. Do not stand on it. It is not strong until you put the hardware on there. So just fill in the middle, make sure everything's level and it's looking good. Then you could come back around and on the leisure board install these joist hangers. We'll have a PDF with the joist hanger information, and then on the side you could see that's just an angle bracket. We use a palm nailer to install these. They're only about $60. And on the sleeper, the hardware that we use are those hurricane ties. So you get to reinstall everything you just put up with screws, but with actual galvanized hardware. And then that is when you could start standing on it. It is strong. Now the last thing you need to do is work on the back, where you need to make everything the same length, which you could do by just measuring one side and the other side and snapping a line all the way down for the other boards. And you'll see us doing that right now. Once you mark your lines, measuring each end from the end of the house, find where you want it, take your chalk line and hold it at both marks, and then snap it so it makes a mark on every single joist going down. Once you have all your lines marked, you could mark them with a pencil with a square to make it easier, and then just go down. It's easier to cut it from the top, and then you look down and everything's the exact same. It is absolutely beautiful when it works out like that. It's so satisfying to see. Once you have your joist cut to size, just cut off the excess of your sleeper board that you don't need that hangs off over, and then your frame is just about finished once you're kind of trimming off everything you don't need. Once you have the access cut off all your wood, cut a board to size that goes across the entire width of the back of your deck, and then you want to cap all of the joists and connect them to this board here. And just start the screws so that it's easier. It's kind of a heavy piece of wood, and then just screw it onto the back of every single joist. And we have some tricks to kind of bring everything up to level. You could see us do that with a screw and a hammer as we walk down and attach everything to each single joist. So if your joist needs to come up, temporarily put a screw in the joist and use the hammer to bring up the joist, and at the same time push down on the backer board. And just if you do that starting on one side and you do this working your way down to the end of the platform, then everything should be flush and level still by this method. It works really well. You don't necessarily want to measure the height of your platform. I mean, you could do it. It probably wouldn't change that much. But if you just go off a little bit, you know, the ground changes so much. Just a little bit where the floor, where the stairs will end closer to. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. We all know how our concrete slabs look in our backyard. So we're gonna measure to the bottom of this. So our total height is what we're looking for. The total height is 50 and 3/8 is what I'm looking at. 50 and 3/8. So now that you know your height, what you're gonna do is pull out your smartphone, or you could get on your computer and go to dex.com. Yep. So, okay, then it asks for a total rise, which is what we just measured. So that's 50 and 3/8. Your step run, you're usually going to put 9. Because our boards are about 5 inches and you want about an inch overhang. We're doing 2 boards. Prefer the flush frame. Easier to mount, and it kind of like widens your deck a little bit. I think it just looks a lot better. So you just plug in this basic information, you know, just your height, 9, 2 boards, and flush. And then you just calculate it, and then it literally tells you exactly what you need. So there's going to be 7 steps, and they're going to be 7 inches and 3/16 tall. And for code, your stairs have to be between 7 and 8 inches. So if they're up to code, they can't be like 4 1/4 or something like that, you know. So they need to be between 7 and 8 inches, and they also have to be all consistent. So you can't have like one be 7 1/4 and one be like 7 3/4. It's not, oh, it's between 7 and 8. Like, they all have to be the same exact thing. And if you just keep those 2 guidelines, then your stairs will be up to code. So you'll cut your own stringers out of a 2x12, and your main tool that you will use for this is called a carpenter square. The small square that we've been using. This square is called a speed square. This is a carpenter square. And what goes on the carpenter square, these are what you call stringer gauges. So they're literally made for this contraption to make this specific thing. So what you do, you have your two measurements. One is going to be the 9, which you will put over here on your right hand side. And then your height, you're gonna make 7 and 3/16. Let me double check. 7 and 3/16. So that is right there. So you have your two measurements. Run is on your right, your rise is on your left. And the tip of the V is facing out. So you're holding it like this. This is what you got. This is what you're working with right here. So what you do is you literally, once the gauges are where you need them to be, you just stick them straight flush with the edge of your board, and then you just trace the old one too. And if we remember, our website told us that we need 7 steps. So I'm just doing this until I have my 7, my 5, 6, 7. We did it. Now this is a very important step right here. So once you have your 7, you want to do one more, but you're not going to do another run. You're just doing another rise, and this is for the bottom stair. And the bottom stair is always an inch shorter than the rest of the stairs. So you're gonna make this line right here. You're gonna stop at the 1 inch mark. That's where you're stopping. And that is the rise for the step that rests on your concrete floor. So that's pretty much what they are going to look like. And from here, you can take your gauges off. And then you just finish drawing them out by lining your lines up. Right here. Just finish that to the board. Finish this one off by lining up your 2 lines once again. And that's why I just love this carpenter square so much, because it makes every task that you use it for just so incredibly simple. So easy to visualize, so easy to use. So this is what we're going to cut off. Now this is what we are going to cut off. Now it's important to cut the bottom first and then cut the top. What you cut, like, you could cut the bottom or the top first, but you want to cut the 2 of them off, and then you could check it before you start cutting out all your middle ones. And I'll show you what I mean by that. What you're doing now is cutting stringers. The stringer is the boards that make up the frame of your staircase. So they're basically your joists for the stairs. That's what a stringer is. And when you're cutting your stringers, it's a lot more useful to use a circular saw that is corded. I love my battery power tools, but for stringers specifically, it uses so much energy that my batteries die so fast. So if I use a corded saw, I could get through all the stringers that I need to. So here, like I said before, you want to cut off the top and the bottom before you do anything else. And when I'm cutting these, I cut to the side of the line, so I'm pretty much still leaving the lines on my stringer here. So, like I said, before you start trying to cut the whole stringer, you just want to get the top cut and the bottom cut. So then what you can do is you can check it up against your deck to make sure that it's right. How do we make sure it's right? What do I mean? Oh, is it right? I mean, does it sit flush on the ground? Does it sit flush on the deck? Which it does. Now the last thing we have to see is it level while they're both sitting flush. Well, on there, can you zoom in on that? You can see that it's level. And then what I can do, you can get like a visual of what the steps are going to be. And you could actually sit there and measure out these lines like so. Which the top is pretty level. As I'm measuring these, they look like they're a little low. So there's a couple things you could do in this situation. One would be drawing out a level line for each step before you cut it, in which that's perfectly reasonable. You know, there's only 7 of them, so it wouldn't take too long. Or what you can do is bring this on the outside of the deck. So my stringer wasn't quite level as you made your way down the stairs. So what you can pretty much do to fix that is, if you're doing this flush mount, is you could just sneak the stringer behind your frame until they are level, and then just make your mark. So you'll cut off a little bit out of the back at a slightly different angle, and it kind of changes the way that all of your stairs rest on the concrete, so you can kind of manipulate the back so it does indeed make everything else flush after you make that new angle on the back side, which is why I prefer the flush mount, just because it bleeds into the deck anyway. So if you cut a little bit more off of the top, it doesn't necessarily matter that much, if that makes sense. So I got my new angle on the very top that is attached to the deck. Now that it is cut, I'm going to stick it up against the deck. Make sure it's flush here, flush. I can set my level on there. Check the lines as I go down. And you can see we're, for the most part, ready to go. Looks really good to me now. Like I said before, you want to leave the line, so cut just to the side of it with the line still being on the board. And then what you want to do, get the third saw you'll need for this project. This one is called a jigsaw, and it's basically a small sawzall that gets like really into the fine cut. So like a lot of Finnish carpenters will use this tool. And for a deck, I mean, it's pretty much rough framing. The only time you'll really need it is if you're cutting your stringers or you're notching out for a post, really. And so you just take your sawzall or your jigsaw here. And just finish it off. You've got that nice clean line. So I'm just gonna do that for this entire stringer. And this entire stringer here is gonna be my template. So you need a stringer every 12 inches on center. So our staircase here is gonna be 4 feet. We need 5 stringers. I'm literally going to trace this. I'm gonna put this on top of my other 2x12s and just trace the shape. But I'm not going to trace any other stringer besides this one. So they're all being traced off of the same exact one. That's how they can become the closest. And they need to be as close as possible to make you building your staircase as easy and simple as it can be. So I'm gonna cut the rest of our stringers and then we're gonna show you how to mount them. So now you've got your stringers cut. Let me show you how to hang these bad boys. So if you can recall, we've talked about the joist hangers for these guys, the hurricane ties for this guy, and now these are called stringer straps. This is your last piece of hardware you got to know about for your framing. And these things hang your stringers. If you're doing a flush mount where your first step is pretty much level with the top of your platform, you want to make a level line 2.5 inches below the top. So I got my line here. So that's going to be the top of my straps. So I'm going to nail them all down so that way I could just bend this up after they're all nailed onto the deck and then just nail the stringers onto the straps. And that's really the only way the stringers are typically connected to the platform. They're not screwed together at all. They're just both nailed onto this plate, and that keeps them together. It's cool because weight going up and down pretty constantly on the stairs as people walk up and down, these things will like flex to it and it'll actually keep the wood from like cracking for a longer period of time, which is very smart that they came up with this system. So what I'm gonna do, I made my marks. So the manufacturer for this specific composite material that we're using for the boards require our stringers to be 8 inches on center. So I have all of these marked out here, 8 inches, 8 inches, 8 inches. I have my level line here. And so what I'm actually gonna do is I'm just gonna go through and I'm gonna use our palm nailer. And you'll see why this is so much easier with the palm nailer once we're getting underneath the stringer. But I'm just gonna hang each one, make sure it's plumb, and just hang all of the metal pieces before I even bring up the wood. And it doesn't usually matter which way these go, but if I'm mounting one on the outside where the stringer is going to be exposed, I usually like to have the plate facing inward so you can't see it. Especially if I'm not wrapping this in composite or PVC, then if everything is staying wood, then it just looks a lot cleaner if you can't see that. So I'll just get one in on the top there. Plumb it up with my bullet level. There you go. And then I'll get one in on the bottom just to keep it straight. And then from that, I just fill the rest in. Now that I have my mending plate on my deck, this is how I'm going to mount my stairs to it. So I'm gonna make this nice and flush here. Now once I have it where I want it, now that's not attached right now. It's literally, the weight is just leaning on the deck. And so it should be able to stay balanced like that if your cuts are straight, you know? And so I just could position it exactly the way I want it, like this, and then I could just tack this into the side real quick. So I like to just get the one hanging on there before I bend the bottom up. And you literally just take it and you push it over and bend it at the seam there. So make sure you push this up, you get everything nice and tight. And once again, I just have a couple in there, and then I go through and I fill in all of these that are underneath. You know, you straighten them up and you could square them out as you build them down, build them over, depending on how wide your staircase is and what material you're using to wrap it. I need a total of 7 stringers, so you kind of square them off as you build them. I usually attach them to the ground on the 2 sides. I could show you that after I have the rest up. But right now, this is how it's attached. It's strong enough to just actually walk right up. So once you do that 6 more times, then you know, we could attach the 2 sides on the ground, and then after that we're ready to start wrapping this baby with the composite material that our client chooses to wrap his deck with. So now that you've got your frame pretty much done, you're about ready to start slapping on your deck boards. You hung your stringers, we showed you how to do that. Now the next step is actually extremely important. You're going to apply a product called joist tape here. We get this from Lowe's. We like the Trex brand. It's a brand of composite material. And what joist tape does, your composite deck boards should last forever, right? But in theory, if it's all sitting on wood, the composite is only going to last as long as the wood does. So if you've got your composite material sitting on the wood, there's going to be gaps. Water will get down into the gaps, get into the wood, and then will eventually rot over time. But what joist tape does, it adds just another layer of protection for moisture to stop getting into the wood, penetrating it, and protecting it from rotting. So it's important, especially on like a composite deck. We don't normally do it if we're doing like an all wood install, but when you are building a composite deck, people usually spend more money to have the longevity for it. And so joist tape will get you that maximum longevity that everybody is looking for with a higher ticket project like a composite deck. Pretty much what you just do, the joist tape comes with a film on the other side that you just peel off, and then you just apply it on the top of your joist where your deck boards are going to be sitting. And it's just that simple. It just takes a few minutes depending on the size of your deck, obviously, and then you just wrap everything you can, and then you're ready to start putting on the deck boards after that. But let me show you how we do this. Okay, so you want to get started with your white peel. So you peel that off to get the adhesive side of the tape exposed, and it's incredibly sticky, so it kind of slightly difficult to work with, but you'll get the hang of it. Start at the very edge of your joist here, and you just pull down the roll and apply the pressure. Just keep unraveling it as you walk down your joist. And it's really important that you cover the whole top of your joist, because that is what's going to protect your deck. So once you get down to your joist, you're going to grab your knife and you're just going to cut it right at the end of your joist. You really don't want the tape to overlap, just because the tape is really thick and you want to keep, the consistency of the height towards everything. I mean, you don't want to raise it up any bit more over here than you do over here by overlapping the tape. So we're just going to cut it down and then wrap this on its own. So just don't overlap the tape and you'll be okay. And so just take your knife and just score it right at the end here. And then you're good to start moving on your next joist, and it's just that simple. So we're going to go through and tape every single joist, the band board, the leisure board, and also all of the stringers for the stairs that we cut, just so everything lasts as long as humanly possible. All right, we've got our joist tape on all of the joists. You can kind of see how we have them on the stringers. So we were just kind of setting ourselves up for success here by getting all of our boards chopped up, laying them on out for the platform just so we have some space to work with up here. Now we're just gonna kind of start going through putting on these deck boards. Now the composite decking system is held together by clips. To start the composite, they have starting clips for it, but they're not very strong. I've always had trouble with them. And so what we usually use are these GRK trim screws and just go right into the top on one side, just like we would on, say, wooden deck boards. And so these screws are really small, so you could just barely see them, right? So I'm just going straight into the top here to start my boards, and then I'm going to use the clips for every other board after this, up until we get to the end where I'll use these screws again. And so if you could swing over here, our boards are just barely longer than our deck is, which is what we want, because the way we're going to line this up is everything is going to barely hang off, and then we're going to cut a clean line down the edge of the deck to get everything perfectly straight. And if you cut everything together, then it'll be a nice uniform line. We're using this Ultra Deck brand, and so what we want to do is get it completely flush. So when we put our plastic on the side, then it'll cover up this groove right here. So I'm just going to use the bit that the box of screws comes with and just go straight down, I'm just going to put a screw every joist lands here. So we'll have about 10 screws on this thing on just the one side, because the clip going into the groove will clamp it down to attach it on the other side. So we only have to do the one side here. So there's a lot of different composite clips on the market, and I've tried probably most of them, not all of them, but the ones I have tried, these are by far my favorite. There's turbo clips. We get them from Menards. I'm sure you have a Menards somewhere close by. You could order them online, but these are by far the best. So a lot of the clips that you would see, like Fibron makes some that you'd get at Home Depot or something. The little clips that sit on the joist, and you have to just set them on the joist and set it all up, and then you come over after everything is all laid down to screw down all of the clips. That was a lot more work coming around twice than what I wanted to do. It just saves more time with this system because it's on a clip. And with these clips, you get to actually cinch them down complete instead of going back around after it's all set up. I'll show you what I mean. You just take this little clip here of the clip of the clips and just sink them down, and then just breaks off. And you just go down every single joist, and that's how you do it with these beautiful turbo clips. So now you have your first row of clips down, and your trim screws are keeping the other side of your first board down. All you got to do is take your second board and slide the groove right into the clips. Now that they're all in, you just come back around and you just repeat the process throughout the entire deck. And it's interesting because the boards are really just held down by these clips. They're not actually attached to the platform themselves. So it's just all pressure really that's keeping all these boards down. Break it off, and as you work your way down to the deck, you know, these boards aren't perfect, so you want to be like continuously kicking it in to the clips to make sure that they all stay attached to each other. Because if you miss one clip and you don't catch it, by the time you get there, there's no saving it. You'll have to tear all your hard work down and kind of keep going from the point that it missed. This system's all about longevity, you know, so you don't want to skip over any step of this whole process here, because going it step by step is how you're going to guarantee the life of this deck to last you the life of your house, or your stay of the house, or however long you're going to be enjoying your platform for. I've also found that when I'm using these clips, using a drill instead of an impact driver will give you more control of where the screw of the clip is going. So if you're kind of having trouble with that, maybe switch to a drill, like I just did, and it'll save you a whole world of headaches. Wow, what a beautiful deck. We have all the deck boards fully installed apart from the very last one. So we have to take off the width of our last deck board to fit in the space between this deck board and the house. Now this can be tricky because, as you could tell, it's not very consistent. So it's not just going to be like we rip it at 2 inches and it's just going to fit nicely because there's a jut out here. The way I usually handle this is I'll measure down. So I start at one side. So this measures out to be 2 inches and a quarter of an inch. And this jut out, I'm not even going to take that into consideration because I know I'm going to have to notch that out with a jigsaw anyway. So I'm just going to go off of the wall and then deal with that after we make our piece. I'm going to cut it at 2 inches and 3/16. So that's just 1, 2, 3 ticks. And the best way to do that is a table saw. Another option would be to mark each end, snap a chalk line, and then rip it with your circular saw. If you don't want to go buy or rent a table saw, you can do that. But we have a table saw sitting right here. You could buy some cheap ones and it will do the job. I know it seems kind of silly just to purchase a whole tool just for one cut, but you know, if you have other projects that you want to do around your house and you want to get a little bit more involved into this as a hobby or maybe a profession, then a table saw is a really great thing to have around. To 2 inches and 3/16 is what we're going to go for. Make sure it's the same on each side, which it is. Lock down that fence and you're ready to just run your board through that, and it'll cut it at a relatively straight line if you could keep it straight onto the fence as you're cutting it. It gets a little difficult with longer pieces, but something like this that's only 8 feet long, it shouldn't be a big deal. It starts to get a little tricky when you get into like the 12 or 16-foot boards. So here's our new piece. I'm just gonna measure it, see how it ended up looking, and we are pretty much exactly where we were trying to be. So let's take it over to the deck and see how she fits. Now, I already knew it wasn't gonna fit because of this jut out, but what I also wanted to check is how it fits with the rest of the house, and you could do that by just lining it up and sliding her down, and there's plenty of room and it looks pretty good up until right about there. Now the best way to figure this out is to literally line it up about there. Then I just score it with a knife or a pencil or marker, whatever you have, whatever you like to use. I like using a knife because you don't have to wash it off afterwards. Alright, so we pretty much know right where we're going. Now we just need to know how far we gotta cut it now. And we do that simply by measuring the same way we did for the whole board. So that's about 1 inch and 7/8 of an inch right there. So you want to measure it from your opposite side of your scores. I think I got it. So that's lined up with that one. So there you have our notch. It actually looks pretty damn straight. And do I think this is going to work out perfectly right when I put it down? Absolutely not. So our board is really close. It's just about there. I think with just a little force, we could force it in there. And the pieces that need to fall off and break, they will without damaging the top. So if you want to hammer it in like that, make sure you don't hammer the composite itself. You want to put a block of wood on top of it just to protect it from getting damaged. Now you have all the composite down on your platform. You got your sides cut down so it's nice and straight. Now you want to wrap your stringers. So, important thing to keep in mind, I got this set up for us just because it was getting kind of frustrating, everything moving around as I was going through it all. And so before you start laying down any of the plastic, what you want to do is just make sure everything's straight. So if you need it at 48 inches, measure the top stringers at 48 and then maneuver the two sides on the bottom to be 48. And then from there, you just measure where the one stringer is, center to center, side to side, however you choose. Make sure that they're the same from the top to the bottom on every single one from one another. And we went through and did all that and actually stuck the backer on the bottom and the top just so everything would stay together during this demonstration for you. And so once all your stringers are lined up straight and everything's equal distance apart on the top and the bottom between all of the stringers, the first thing you want to do is put your risers on. So this is the back part of your step, not the flat part that you step on. These are your treads, these are your risers. So to begin your install, what you want to do is install all of your risers. And so you can use deck boards for this. You could use cladding like we're going to wrap the side of the platform with. But on this specific deck, we use the 3/4 of an inch PVC. And I'll show you what that looks like. I have this product at all the box stores. I got these at Lowe's. So, you know, we needed about 9 inches. So this is just 9 1/4. So we're going to cut it down to length that we need. And then we're going to take it to the table saw and rip it to the width that we need. But they're all going to be cut out of this dimension. And then we're just going to make it fit to what exactly we need. When you're measuring for your height, you're going to go literally from top to bottom of the wood. So let's find one that's 7 1/4, 7 1/4. So they're all looking to be about 7 1/4, which is good. We want everything to be consistent. This material has two sides, which is cool. One is completely smooth, and one has a wood grain. So you can kind of choose whatever look you're going for. Our composite isn't completely smooth. It has a bit of a wood grain that we're using for the deck boards. So I'm going to go ahead and use the wood grain side. The specific fastener we are using for this application are these Cortex screws. Now these Cortex screws are cool because they're trim screws that come with a plug that's recessed by the drill bit. And so once you have your screw in, you can plug it and cover it up completely with these plugs. And I'll show you what I mean. These screws aren't self-tapping. They need to be pre-drilled. So what you want to do is just take your drill bit, one at the top, one at the bottom. And now this packaging, it comes with the bit that is, it's got this felt tip on it. So it stops the screw from sinking any deeper than it needs to, but stops it for the perfect amount of space to fit these plugs into. So after you pre-drill it, just pop the screw in here. One at the top, one at the bottom. And then these kind of taper down, if you could see that. You take the smaller side, push that into the hole, and then you take your hammer and then just smooth it out. And then you do that for every single hole, and you have 2 screws per stringer at the top and the bottom, just like on the deck boards. And then you just go through and you do that to every stringer on every riser.
So let's talk about railings for a little while. The thing about railings is they come in so many different shapes, sizes, and material. So it's incredibly difficult to give a general building tutorial on one because there's so many different options out there. Even if you choose to build a wooden one, there's so many different ways that you could go about it. And our typical way to build them would be using 2x4s and balusters. The railings, they could just be so different and very simple or very complicated. So the most simple way that I could explain to build a wooden railing would be on the side joists of your deck. You just cut a 4x4 in half, like an 8-foot 4x4. You cut it down to 4 feet. You put it on the inside. Don't notch it out. Just take your through locks that we showed you, and then just put 2 in. So all you see from the side joist is just your 2 through locks, and then your post comes out from the deck, and it's recessed like 1.5 inches, which is fine. And so that's how you get your post in. It's like as simple as anything could possibly be. For our railings, what we do, we use 2x4 hangers. So we'll put a post down onto the ground, nail a hanger on one side of the post and the other side of the post, so it's 3.5 inches above it, and then you could slide your 2x4 in there, and then we make it flush with the top with hangers as well, depending on how tall we want it. So you have your 4x4s, and then your 2x4s, and then you have 2x2s connecting the 2x4s on top. So it creates the barrier, and we usually just use a 2x4 for this blocking and the spacing between the 2x2s. And then just throw like a 2x6 on top that's flush with everything. Let's That's the most simple, basic railing that you could make. That's like our go-to unless somebody wants a wooden railing that they otherwise request a different style, you know? I've built ones before where it's just the posts and then horizontal 2x2s going up with no 2x4s. There's just so many different options. I mean, I've built them before where I have the 2 posts and I just have 2x6s connecting the 2 posts. And then that creates your barrier. So you could be pretty creative with it. A few specs that you have to meet, like you can't have a gap anywhere within the panel that you're building that's greater than 4 inches. Besides that, if it's strong, the sky is really the limit. You could be super creative with it if you really want to. So that's like a wooden railing. If you wanted to wrap it in vinyl, you would install the posts the same way with just the through locks, and then you have a sleeve, and then there's kits that comes with directions. You just follow the directions. Each brand of vinyl is going to be a little different. Same with aluminum. You don't need to install a wooden post for the aluminum like we showed you on our deck. You just put the 4x4s so you have like meat to drill down into for the aluminum posts. And then the rest is just either plug and play, some slide into each other. It really depends on the brand you buy, and each brand will be a little different. They'll always come with directions and be pretty self-explanatory. That's our railing. We usually do an aluminum one because it's easy if the clients can afford it, but it's my favorite to install, and it's also my favorite look. I hope this helps.
So when you're installing the stairs, you have the risers already on there. You want to just push it right up to the riser and screw into the top of it. You don't want to bury your screws. You want to kind of leave them flush, pretty easy accessible, because if anything's going to mess up on this deck over time, it's going to be the stairs, because there's so much weight fluctuation pretty much constantly on them. And so you want to make the screws so it's easy accessible, so you can take them off and maybe shin something, or just replace anything that you need. It would just make your life in the future much easier. And so once you have the risers done, just kind of put your boards right up to it, screw it in from the top, and it's really that simple. You might have to cut a couple shims to kind of level out the playing field if your stringers aren't perfect, which is okay. They hardly ever are. But yeah, just get a little pack of shims and just shim as you need to make everything level. And so once you have your treads down, as far as the composite goes, the only thing that you would have left would be this cladding here. And they come in these big sheets, and just once again, you just put it up to it. We make it level with the deck, so this kind of will cover up the seam of the side and just have like a really nice finished look here. And so you just literally just screw some screws right onto the top, and then we got the same Cortex screws that we used on the white part of the stairs, but they just have brown plugs, and we just use the brown plugs to kind of cover up those screw heads just a little bit, and it has like a really nice finish. And then when you're doing the stringers with the cladding, I cut it out after the fact. Going back, what I would do is I think like the best situation would be when you're cutting the 2x12 for your stringer, screw on the cladding to that and cut them together at the same time, just so they're going to be completely perfect and identical, because that's pretty much the only way to get the two identical. And I wish I would have done that on this one, but there's always room for improvement. And one thing I do want to mention about these stairs, after we had them all complete, we didn't anchor them to the concrete while we were framing it. You can do that. A lot of people will put down a 2x4, anchor that to the concrete, and then notch out the stringers. That's a little too much work for me. Sometimes we've even put angle brackets and drilled holes into the concrete on each stringer, and then attach the stringers to the concrete that way so the stairs don't move. But that's a lot of drilling into the concrete, which is kind of hard work. And so after we built the stairs, we didn't attach them to the concrete. They were moving a little bit while we walked up and down them. And so this is what we did. So I went with this path just because instead of drilling 4 holes per stringer to attach them to the concrete with the angle brackets, we only had to drill 2 holes. We attached the 4x4s the same exact way we showed you to attach the 6x6 on the piers. Just use your hammer drill, go in, squirt your epoxy in. It's the same exact method. And then this is basically just a sleeper here that we built right here. And so we have 2 posts here. Attach the post to the side of the stringers on each side, and then attach a board going across the 2 so all the other stringers can rest on it. And then this simple little build took maybe 10-15 minutes to build after the stairs were already complete, and it just made the stairs so much more strong and stable, and they haven't moved an inch ever since we built this part right here. And so that is something that you might want to do depending on your situation. If you're doing a wooden railing, then if you put the posts on the side of your stringer here, you put your posts on the side of the stringer if you're doing it out of wood. So this last post won't be on your top step. It'll be on the side of the stairs. Then you bolt it into the side of the stringers that way, and then build your railing. That will also keep your stairs down. So depending on the railing, you might not even have to mess with the stairs because the railing would keep it intact. Congratulations! The deck is all complete, and I hope that you love it. I hope that you're proud of it. I hope your family and your friends are impressed by your new set of skills that you could carry with you for the rest of your life on so many different projects. Whether you like being a DIY homeowner or you want to start your own contracting company because you enjoy this project so much you want to start doing this for a living, that's what we do, and we could help you do that as well. You've also saved yourself thousands of dollars by doing it yourself. Now enjoy your hard work, drink your morning coffee, invite your friends over, throw a deck warming party, please, because you really deserve it.